Greg, thanks very much for joining us. I've enjoyed all the messages we'll be swapping over the last couple of weeks getting this sorted out. We've got Rovers and Alloa this weekend, two clubs that I don't think anybody knows better than you. My opening question was going to be just to poke a wee bit of fun at you and say, are these two clubs that you've got a particular affection for, or do you just not like spending petrol money?
Nah, it's good to be on. As you said, spent most of my football career at both clubs. Fond memories at both. Got a good sort of rapport with fans and ex-players and folk that are at both clubs. So now it's good to be on and speak about it.
Great. It was one of the things that I sent over to you was your career stats for Raythrovers. Our club statistician Phil Nicholson's like a forensic scientist, so I think he surprised you a wee bit. 131 appearances and 40 goals, 143rd in the Rovers all-time appearances. We speculate that there's more than 3,000 players who have played for Raythrovers over the years, so that's a pretty good hit rate. And what really brought a wee smile to my face, quite apt, is that you played the exact same number of games as John Baird, a player that you know really well, and a player that you obviously shared a pretty spectacular goal. We know John well, so he will not forgive us if I don't point out that he did manage to score 5 more goals than you, though. Yeah,
I was quite shocked at that stat, to be fair, because I think when you think of John Baird, you're thinking he'd be well up in the appearances. So that's 130 odd games is good going. Gutted that Beardy's got 5 more goals than me, but he's a club legend, so it's good to sort of be up and around that though.
Well, you can certainly say that you had a hand in the most important one that we'll come on to in a moment. But I was interested to start, 2 episodes with Raythrovers, 4 with Alloa. It's one of these kind of football cliches about never go back. Particularly managers get that kind of thrown at them when they go back for a second term. It's something that you've never had a problem with. Was the particular drawback to both clubs the familiarity with the fans, the environment? What was it that's always drew you back, or is it just opportunity?
I think opportunity is a big one. If you look at where both clubs have really sat over the last 10 years, top of League One, sort of mid-table in the Championship, is exactly where I've sort of been playing. And every summer, it's it's like in Scottish football now with 1-year contracts. You have a good season, you're sought after. You have a bad season, it's back to the drawing boards. And just sort of every summer, clubs are in for you. You're out of contract or whatnot. And when a club like Raythrovers comes in for you, it's a no-brainer. And because I've been at Alloa when I was a kid at 16. When they came back in for me when I left Raythrovers, that was a no-brainer again. The way you get treated at both clubs is fantastic, and I think that's the main thing. If you're at a club where you're well looked after, that's where you can play your best football.
The thing that really struck me most when I was looking through your stats for both clubs and indeed beyond both clubs was your relationship with the Challenge Cup. We're also going to kind of speak about the final, but I wondered if you had any particular memories about the early rounds of the year that we actually won the cup. Still in Albion, we played the neighbours up the road, then we had Falkirk, you got a goal in that game, and of course the final. Do you recall any of the games for the earlier rounds?
I remember the Dunfermline game quite well because we went through East End Park on a Tuesday night and I actually pulled my thigh in the warm-up. But I'm sure that was going to be one of my first starts that season. So I didn't say anything. I managed to play at half-time. But then I had to pull up at half-time because I was injured. So I remember that game quite well. Then obviously, I think there was a big break between that game and the Falkirk game. And I'm sure I came off the bench that day and scored and obviously put us into the semi-final.
The Challenge Cup, that was your first goal for Rovers was a Challenge Cup goal against Montrose. Do you remember that?
I do remember that actually, because I done a dodgy celebration after I scored, and it stuck with me for a good few months after that. So I remember that one quite well. So I remember the relief once I scored because I was really wanting to score for the club, and it was good to get off the mark. Yeah,
5-2 win in 2012. The final itself. Obviously it was kind of magnified in terms of the fact that we were playing Rangers. What was the build-up to that like? I can remember being up doing interviews for RaithTV in the week building up to that. And I mentioned this actually to John Baird, who we spoke earlier. There seemed to be just an extra spring in the step, not just because it was a cup final, but because there seemed to be a real belief in amongst you all that something special was going to happen at the weekend. What was that like from the inside?
I think because the semi-final, I'm sure, was December, and the cup final wasn't until, what was it, April. So there was such a long build-up and that excitement sitting in you. But that season, we had a really good team spirit. I remember the Christmas weekend away in Blackpool that Joe Cardo organised, and the team spirit we had that year was always good. It was a good changing room. Then obviously as you got closer to the final, when the cameras start coming, we started doing promos in Kirkcaldy High Street and interviews and that. Like there was a real buzz, and obviously because you're playing Rangers, it makes it that wee bit more special. And at Easter Road, a fantastic stadium, everything just built up to, like, arguably obviously the biggest day of your career, and it was just great to be a part of all that.
I remember at the time one of the big debates was whether they were actually going to play the final at Ibrox, but I think Easter Road probably focused us on but when you're running up that tunnel and doing your pre-match warm-up and you come out and there are 3 stands full of Rangers fans and our own the famous Five end at Easter Road full of Rovers fans, you know, the Challenge Cup is sometimes kind of belittled by fans, and I've heard players saying it as well. It's a bit of an inconvenience, but I'm sure that couldn't be further for your mind when you come up the tunnel that day.
No, 1000%. It actually felt like you were playing at the top level because you're coming out in a massive stadium full. And I remember the warm up and just the adrenaline it gives you. It's something you don't get from your Saturday to Saturday football. It was just something totally different, and to experience it was probably once in a lifetime for me, playing in front of a full stadium in a cup final. But again, I think things like that bring the best out in you, the sort of nervous anxiousness as well, with all the adrenaline going on. It's surreal, if you're being honest.
What was the beyond the preparation, what was the team talk like from Grant, and I'm sure that Paul had some comments to make as well, because again at that time, as well as our management team, we had a really kind of strong background staff as well. What was the time in the dressing room like before the game?
If I'm being honest, the changing room and that, you don't remember much. It's all when you're out in the park and the atmosphere, that's what you can remember. But I do remember we went for a pre-match at a hotel in Edinburgh somewhere, and it was just totally different to what you were used to, and that sort of calmed the nerves and that. Because I'm sure we'd done our team talk at the hotel, now that I remember. So when we got to the ground, it was a case of we knew the team, get stripped, get out for the warm-up.
And it's a game you were obviously kind of looking to make your mark on. Firstly, before we get to the kind of key moments at the end there, what was your recollections kind of watching the game for the sidelines?
Well, it's quite funny you say that. I remember Rangers' game plan that day was long diagonal balls into our box, but we had Dougie Hull and Paul Watson at the back, and one thing Dougie likes doing is heading the ball. So for 90 minutes, you sat and watched Rangers lump up to Dougie, and Dougie would just head it away, whereas we kept trying to play good football. And I think if Rangers had a different approach and maybe tried to play a wee bit more, they would have had more success, because they were playing down our throats. It was, honestly, Dougie was colossus that day.
Man of the match.
He was, but that's Dougie for you, head it and kick it, and it suited him. So it was, from the side, that's all I can sort of really remember. And I remember I was just itching to try and get on the park.
I mean, obviously our goalkeeper had, I think what the youngins call a world day as well. When he was called upon, he kind of pulled out every stop that was required. As we're moving into extra time, and extra time's kind of moving towards the final moments, you're involved. Was it in your mind that penalties were probably looking more likely?
I don't think it was that, because I remember, like, as the game was getting on, I was starting to get a bit frustrated. I was like, I want to be on, I think I should be on. So there was that wee bit of sort of frustration. Then eventually you get your chance, you go on, and you forget about all that, and you're just on to try and prove a point, win the game for your team. But I actually remember it was in the second half extra time, I actually cramped up, which you shouldn't be doing after 15 minutes. But it was just one of the days with adrenaline and whatnot, and you're sprinting around, you leave everything on the park, because obviously you're the fresh legs. And that's one of my memories, was when I cramped up after, I think it was 17 minutes, and I was like, oh my God. But then I don't think penalties were in my mind at that point for some reason, because I think we always felt as long as we kept it tight at 0-0, you had a chance of winning it.
Would you have been up for a penalty if the time had came? Do you think your legs would have
definitely
took it? I mean, cramping up after 17 minutes, is that just adrenaline, do you think?
Probably. Looking back, I think just adrenaline, and it was quite a heavy pitch that day, and you're just going on, and I didn't stop sprinting the whole time I was on, because, do you know what I mean, you're just desperate to win. So, no, I'd definitely been up for a penalty. I would never have shied away from that.
And what about the goal itself? I mean, we'll see if Ian, our videographer, can put that in the corner as we chat, because it's something that Raythrovers fans, we can play in our mind without going to YouTube. We've seen it so many times. Is it something you've watched back a lot?
Yeah, I think every 6 months it pops up on social media somewhere, so it's always a good reminder. But I think the goal, from my point of view, I think it sums up the type of player I am. I think I'm hunting down a lost cause. We're both slipping. I think it was me and Moshney. We're both slipping. I'm first to get up. I get there. You're into a tackle. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't pretty, but it was just one of them you never wanted to give up. And obviously, I got the break of the ball, got my shot away. The goalie saves it, and Beardy scores.
Did you, as the keeper makes the initial save and the ball comes up, is your heart racing, thinking that you're the one that's going to latch onto it?
Well, I remember in the split second that when I've hit the shot, it's came back, and I actually pulled my leg back to get the rebound. Then just before I could even think, Beardy's boom, and it's a goal, and before you know it, you're away celebrating. But I was in a bit of, the camera goes right to me after we score, and I'm in a bit of shock, because it was like, can't believe this has happened. Brilliant.
I think all of the camera people who were behind the goal that particular day, they got some quite amazing shots, and I certainly remember one where there is a complete look of disbelief in your face. But we'll mention them a couple of times, but I think it'd be unfair that if I wasn't to mention it. We've done a really nice kind of 30-40 minute interview with John Baird before he went over to Australia. So I'm not sure it was on camera, if it was just as we're chatting in the warm-up to that piece. Is it one of the things that he said, make sure you ask me about the goal, because he wanted to single out that he's absolutely convinced that you would have scored had he not. And again, he kind of paid the compliment. He says, look, we're both absolute predators. And if it wasn't going to be me, Raythrovers were going one up. That I can tell you about. From that point on, it seemed like an absolute age between his scoring, celebrating, and the final whistle. I mean, I think the referee played to time, but it did seem like he added on about quarter of an hour. Did it feel like that on the pitch?
No, definitely. I'm sure again I cramped up in my calf. But nah, it did feel like an age, and it was one of the things, you've been through it with Scotland a few times and other teams or whatever, and you're like, how long left? But the relief in the final whistle went, it was unbelievable, because I think after we scored, I think the Rangers fans all started leaving. So I was going to ask if that was something.
I'm going to ask if that's something that you were aware of on the pitch, because certainly, I mean, we were obviously in the sidelines and we were commentating for RaithTV that particular day, but it seemed an absolute split second, because you're absolutely zoned into the game. Is like yourself, it seems to have lasted an age, and then you suddenly look around the stadium, and there was a mass exodus of a speed that I've only seen twice in my life, and it was once in '94 when Rovers won the cup, and then again at the Ramsden's Cup final. But were you aware on the pitch that maybe Rangers fans had just kind of given up belief that few minutes?
Well, I think that gives you a bit of strength when you're on the pitch, when you look up to the stand and they're all piling out and you see all the green, obviously Easter Road seats. So it gave you that wee bit extra strength to get over the line, because obviously Rangers were going through a really bad spell at the point, and can you really blame their fans for what they've been through? But definitely in that moment, it gave us that wee extra just to get over the line, because obviously behind our goal, we still had packed out, screaming and shouting us on, which you need.
Absolutely. I certainly don't recall any video or photographs of you receiving treatment for cramp after the game. What's your memories of the celebration and the journey home?
I remember I actually got quite emotional after the game for whatever reason. And I just remember obviously celebrating with all the players and the staff, Wayne Henderson, Gunter, Paul Smith, Grant Murray, and just obviously all your teammates, and you're looking into the stand, and at clubs like Rovers and Alloa, you know quite a lot of the fans, and you get to know them, and some become friends, and just getting to share that moment with them. Then my family were up in the top tier, so getting to wave up to them, and I know they were super proud. So it was just all round. It was just a great thing to be involved in.
So it's a lovely comment you make about feeling emotional after it, because again, it's a very, very privileged position that we're in, getting to do the interviews, not just the stuff we do on camera, but as you're kind of planning pieces, you have a wee chat, and you're not the first player who said to me that how emotional they felt after particular games, particular goals, particular celebrations of things like a cup win, because actually the enormity of what it means for not only the club and the fans, but actually their family who have invested so much, because players always come back to extend their gratitude to their mum, their dad, their granny, their granddad, whoever it is that was running them to games at age 6, 8, 10, 12. So did that kind of feel like a reward for everybody who invested in Greig Spence?
Yeah, absolutely. Just as you said there, my mum, my dad, my granny and granddad, the four of them have travelled all over Scotland since I was a wee boy. And when things are going well, it's great, you get to share it with them. But obviously, football, there's a lot more low times and high times. So they feel the low times 10 times worse than you half the time. So I just think in that moment it was great for them, because obviously you just want to do them proud, and for all the support they give you. Because as you said, when you're young, you need them to drive you places. When you want to give up, it's them that talks you into not giving up. And still to this day, I'm 28 and I still rely on their support. So days like that, they'll never forget. They still talk about it in their work, to their friends. It gives them something to still speak about and look fondly back at.
Brilliant. I'll kind of jump across your two spells here by asking you a wee bit of a question about some of your strike partners. I'll run through just a quick wee audit that me and Phil done looking at it. There's some great names in there: Brian Graham, Pat Clark, Callum Elliott, Gordon Smith, Louis Vaughan, John Baird we mentioned, Louis Vaughan twice. The kind of enigma that was Willis Furtado, and of course Liam Buchanan, who I don't know, you must at times feel like Siamese twins as you've kind of gone through your footballing career. Can you tell us about some of these guys and the kind of talents and the nonsense that you've had playing with them?
Well, I think going back to the first season, it was Pat Clark and Brian Graham, who were both mid-20s at the time, experienced players for that level, and it was good to come in as a young boy. I was only 20 in my first season, or 21, and to learn off the two of them was fantastic. Obviously, Brian had a fantastic season that year, scoring 27 goals or something, and was destined to go on to better things. Then obviously the next season, we signed Callum Elliott and Gordon Smith. Callum Elliott was playing in Scottish Cup semi-finals for Hearts and playing right at the top level, and Gordon Smith scoring in Edinburgh derbies and that. So it was, again, just a learning experience, because I'm still only 22. To learn off boys like Callum Elliott was incredible. And it's the funny one about Gordon Smith is I played with him a few years later at Cowden for 6 months, and he's the best striker, well, the strike partnership I've ever had. And I'd happily go on record and say that. Just our styles really connect. And we never really got the chance in that season at Raythrovers, because it was either me with Callum Elliott or him with Callum Elliott. Then a couple of years later, you're actually
it kind of comes connecting off. I mean, he arrived obviously well known because his brother's relationship with Raythrovers as well he's a natural goal scorer, of course, that maybe more recognisable at East Fife. But Pat Clark, you mentioned there, I always sometimes think Pat's a wee bit of a kind of forgotten Rovers player. I think that sometimes happens when you've had a spell at West Fife neighbours as well. But Pat was a player, wasn't he?
Yeah, Pat was excellent. His technique and his experience in that, obviously played at a wee bit of a higher level as well, with Dunfermline in the SPL. And Pat was a lovely guy. He was somebody I got on really, really well with. He was a really lovely guy. But again, that first season, I spoke about the second season having a good change room. That first season with Alan Walker and Dougie Hull, Pat Clark, Joe Hamill, all really, really good boys that when I first came in, they made me feel really welcome, and I learned off.
I mean, you have been part of what we would kind of describe as big dressing rooms. There's been big players round about you at each of your clubs. In terms of Rovers, who are the players that stand out in terms of being the heart and soul of dressing rooms? I mean, I think Alan Walker's got somewhat legendary status in all of these interviews, because he's a guy that always seems to bounce back to. is a happy dressing room every bit as important as what the manager puts forward in terms of tactics and so forth?
1000%. Especially now being that wee bit more experienced, looking back, you need to have a changing room where the team spirit's good, and that comes from within. It doesn't matter how good a manager is, it comes from within. You need to have good people around it, and you want to have boys that want to buy into the changing room. And fortunate enough, the 3 spells I've had at Raythrovers, I've had that. But mentioning Alan Walker, he was 1 in a million character-wise, just full of personality. And again, he really looked after me when I first came in and that. And I still stay in touch with him. But you need boys like him. He had personality, because I think folk try and argue nowadays that personality's fallen out of football a wee bit. And you can sort of see that maybe at a higher level potentially on the TV. It's players aren't allowed to be as boisterous. But boys like Alan Walker and Kyle Benedictus, Davo, boys like that, you need characters like that in the game.
I mean, Benny obviously played with you at both clubs. We'll come on to speak about your semi-final win with Alloa as well. What's he like to have in the dressing room? He's certainly a player that you won't struggle to hear on the pitch. No,
Benny's quality. I couldn't probably tell you half the stories about Benny on a Zoom that's meant to be quite light-hearted, or I could get him into trouble. But you need boys like this. That's how he's had such a good career. His personality, because to stick at the level he's played at since he broke onto the scene at 16, and he's still playing. And yeah, Benny's a privilege to play with him, because he's obviously a lot of ability, but again, it just comes down to character, and you need that.
Yeah, you don't captain teams for so long without having something a bit kind of special in your locker. Second period will always be defined, I think, by that final day. Of course, it was a playoff, but I think we all kind of recognise the game against Alloa, where any kind of win and we're champions. Rovers being Rovers, we don't pull it off. We hit the post in the last minute. What was your recollections? Again, we done some promos and stuff, and there was some kind of fans' evenings building up to the actual final game. So we certainly know how robust the belief was. But as that game's gone on, how do you cope with that as a player? We've all got stories as fans about our dejection, but how do you get through that as a group?
Well, I think just looking back, it was a back and forward the league of that year as an AR. It was we were going to win the league, then they got ahead. Then I think with 2 or 3 games to go, it looked like it was theirs in the bag. Then Alloa actually done us a favour and beat them. And it just gave us a week of training. Then we had Alloa on the Saturday to go and win the league, and the preparation was excellent. Everyone, you had a lot of nervous energy, because you genuinely believed, right, well, Alloa is going to rest players for the playoff on the Tuesday. They're not really coming. They don't need to win. It's meaningless for them. So we were all prepped and ready to go, and it's easily the lowest point of my career by a mile. You turn up expecting to go and win a league that we'd worked so hard for all year. Every day in training, it was just aimed on winning the league, and unfortunately we turned up and we just couldn't score the goal that was needed. But because I remember that day I was on the bench and I was speaking to Jim Goodwin as the game was going on, and he was basically saying to us that like their players were shooting for 30 yards and that it was just not a muckabout game for them. It was just there was no pressure. They were just going out to just get through it. And maybe with them just sitting back and not really trying to attack her, that probably went against us. But definitely it was the lowest point in my career, because I'm sure they opened up the other stand behind the goal to get fans in. And you had the player of the year night after it and that. And it was obviously, if you won the league, it would have been a massive achievement. But yeah, definitely the lowest point in my career.
Yeah, it's a very Kirkcaldy, very Raythrovers thing for a collective low moment in your career, and then we have a celebratory Player of the Year dance that night. I don't think there's any club will have had a more low-key event than that one. It was a difficult session, wasn't it? So all the volunteers have put so much effort into a good night, but we're so flat.
No, totally. It was. I think because we thought the league was away, then getting that opportunity to go in our own hands for the last day of the season, going to that night, obviously. We had the game on the Tuesday, so nobody was drinking. We could only stay for a couple of hours because we had to go away and prepare. then I think that rolled into the Tuesday night game. I think we were beat, if I'm being honest, well, if I'm being perfectly honest, we were beat before we even turned up. And unfortunately, that was just the way it was.
In terms of that particular time in a Rovers shirt, signing off in the playoffs, it was interesting when you said that in some ways the game was kind of lost, or the tie was lost before it started. Was there that sense going into the second leg of that game back at Stars Park? Because we seemed to kind of throw everything at it, but Alloa, to be fair, whereas they might have been reserved a number of days earlier, kind of came and really took the game to us that particular second leg.
Yeah, I think it was just a disappointment rolled onto the Tuesday. Then I think after the Tuesday night game, we sort of had a team meeting and tried to pull ourselves together to give it a right good go, one last sort of chance. And we did try and throw everything at them on the Saturday. But again, that Alloa team were an excellent team. You can't get away from it, and it's what they went on to achieve since then. In the Championship shows that it wasn't that we were playing a poor team and we underperformed. It was just unfortunate that it was a really good team.
Well, we're going to kind of move on just shortly to speak a wee bit about Alloa. What was your best goal in a Rovers jersey? What was the one that you think was technically the best, and what's the one that just means the most to you?
Technically, I don't really score many good goals. All my goals are inside the box. I'm sure I scored an overhead kick up at Bucky in my third spell, which is, for me, quite good going. But as far as goals that meant a lot, I'm sure it was the first season with a Scottish Cup game away at Airdrie, and Brian Graham got sent off for something in the first half. So we were down to 10 men for a long spell, and I'm sure I managed to get a last-minute equaliser. And I just remember going and celebrating with the fans after it and that, and it felt like a proper cup tie, so that one sticks in my memory quite well.
Great. Coming on to Alloa, what does that club mean to you? It's, in terms of a club being absolutely embedded in their community, Alloa kind of fly the flag for that, don't they?
No, 1,000%. It's a right family club. You get well looked after. It's probably the only club I've been at where it doesn't matter if you're a chairman, the tea lady, or the kit man. Everyone just gets treated the exact same. And I went there as a 15-year-old boy that was not really doing well in football. Probably it was my last chance if I was ever going to make something of myself in football. Totally fell out of love with it. And within a year of joining their under-15s, I was up training with their first team, playing in competitive professional games. And just the whole way I got looked after during my first time there is something that's shaped the rest of my life, and I'm forever grateful for the opportunity that I got.
It's an incredible kind of high and low description you give there of, at 15 and a half, kind of falling out of love with the game. And in a relatively short space of time after that, you're moving on and bagging them what I believe still a kind of record transfer fee at $100,000. So I mean, I'm sure Alloa fans would think that you've repaid that investment.
No, totally. As I said, I signed with their under-15s. They were just in a sort of local league. It wasn't anything like massively progressive, but at that point, Alloa had a nice youth system in place. Where the progression was there. If you done well at the 15s, you got a chance for the 16s, and I got in with a good manager then. I bought a man, Rab Campbell, that was really good with me. Got me scoring goals at 15. Before you know it, getting a chance with older teams, scoring goals with him. Before you know it, Alan Maitland, who I think was always looking for a young player to really promote. I just fitted the bill at that time, and Alan Maitland was absolutely fantastic with me. And the way he made me feel loved and the confidence he gave me at that young age, I think shaped the rest of my career.
One of the things in doing a wee bit of research that really stood out for me is we get to interview kind of opposition managers, and you're in and around kind of press rooms after games and so forth. So you played under quite a lot of names, people who either I know or who have kind of seen doing their business. Your time at Alloa, if I'm correct, Alan Maitland, Danny Lennon, Barry Smith, Jack Ross, Jim Goodwin. you probably couldn't have handpicked better people to kind of work on your character and your self-belief. Can you tell us a wee bit about what these guys were like? You know, I mean, Alan Maitland, you obviously kind of moved on with kind of Hamilton, but we had a lot of dealings with them through the early years, actually, at RaithTV, and we always found them impeccably helpful. What were these guys like?
Well, totally. Well, Alan Maitland, what he used to do to me is just give me so much belief. He looked after me. And even if I had a bad training session or a bad game, it was just pure belief he put into me. But he had the other side of it, where he'd phone my parents after games and that on the way home, knowing that I'm in the car, and just saying, "Oh, what jinky on the day?" And you're sitting there, it's like, that's the first team manager phoning my dad on the way home for a game. I got the last 5 minutes. I just think the way he went about it was, I couldn't ask for a better manager at that stage of my career. And obviously moving on, when I went back there, it was Barry Smith, and Barry tried to get me when he was a Dundee manager. But I decided to sign with Raith under Grant Murray. But then eventually I've signed with him at Alloa, and obviously I worked with Barry at Raith. And I think he gets a wee raw end of the deal. He's one of the best managers I have worked under. He's a total gentleman. He works his socks off. And I really enjoyed working with him as well as I've had with him. But then moving on to Jim Goodwin and Jack Ross. Jack Ross by far is the best manager I've ever worked with. He was destined to go to where he is now, and I think he'll even go further than Hibs, if I'm being honest. He came in for me, and I was going to re-sign with Cowdenbeath because I had a really good season there, even though we got relegated. I had a personal good season, and I was about to re-sign, and he phoned me just last minute. And after speaking to him on the phone for 10 minutes, I was like, I need to go and sign with him. And obviously signing with him, he got us at Alloa on I think it was 10 games winning streak. And basically he took us to Celtic Park to play Celtic, and he had us thinking that we were going to beat Celtic that day. Like, we generally believed that we're under Brendan Rodgers, we were going through to beat them. And it took them to the 82nd minute to break us down. So I knew Jack Ross was going to go into bigger things. Then obviously Jim Goodwin just at the back of that. He was the one that surprised me the most, because as a player he was quite aggressive and like quite thuggish, if you know what I mean. I don't think you'd mind me saying that. But then as a manager, he's calm, cool, collected, very rarely loses his cool, very rarely shouts. It's all, everything's structured, he's well spoken, and which you wouldn't think the player he was, he'd be that type of manager. So I've been really lucky to have these managers. I
always remember after the game where the one that got away and we didn't win the league, I always remember the way in which Jim Goodwin presented himself and the level of respect that he still offered to Raythrovers. And he's firstly in his pre-match, but more particularly in his kind of post-match after that game. It left a real note. You kind of watch that for the sidelines and you think, yeah, I'm going to wish that guy all the best, because actually he had a lot of dignity about him. Very different personality to play for than the player that he was.
1,000%. As you said, I'm sure his first game for Alloa, when he came in, because he dropped down from the SPL to sign for Alloa at that point, 5 minutes into the game, he two-footed the ref. And you're like, what have we got here? And
yeah.
And I'm sure his first couple of games as manager, when he took over, he was still trying to play. And I'm sure it was his second game he got himself sent off. And we ended up losing. Then when he came back from suspension, we were in an important game against whoever it was. And at half time, his team talk was all about, right, we have to keep the head here, keep everyone on the pitch. If we do this, and this, we'll win the game. 2 minutes into the second half, Jim Goodwin, elbow sent off. And you're like... But then as a manager, he was because I think after that he went away and said, right, I'm going to give the football up. We're going to concentrate on managing. And I think that was probably his best decision, because, as I said, as a manager, it was all calm, cool, collected. Whereas as a player, he was a bit...
Can I get you to backtrack a wee bit? You mentioned that Barry Smith, you say, I feel he gets a wee bit of a raw deal, and it's something that I'll be honest, I've always kind of carried with myself. He's one of my favourite people to kind of work alongside. I always speculate whether that was because Barry just really didn't like the kind of press side of the game. Was he a manager that really belonged in the dressing room and on the playing pitch? On the training pitch?
I would agree with you there. He was more a training pitch manager. I probably learned on the pitch more from Barry than probably most managers, because he was working with us on a daily basis and drumming how he wanted to play into. But you could argue that's maybe because I remember he kept talking about mind games with Ian McCall, which is right down his street, whereas Barry Smith, that's not his style. He's a respected guy that gives 100%, and you could maybe make that argument it's maybe just that wee bit of charisma that lets him down. But again, I think he makes up for it in many other ways, the way he carries himself and the respect he gets from the players.
Well, Alloa fans are going to expect, an opposition kind of volunteer step-in journalist picking up through their history and speak with Greig Spence. I'm going to jump straight onto the semi-final victory against Rangers. I guess we never really watch games as a neutral. No matter if you're watching two teams from South Korea, you pick a colour of jersey you like. But obviously, when we look at that team, and there's a list of players that we've all got connections with at this side of Fife. So I'm sure we were all kind of surrogate Alloa fans for the night. Firstly, I was thinking that Ali McCoy surely doesn't send you Christmas cards, because his efforts to get his hands on that cup were thwarted by you on another occasion. As we know, 2 goals, what was that night like? And you said earlier about the connection at our level of football, that the connection that you can have with supporters, because it's not just social media and trying not to do the right or the wrong thing. You guys are in Asda's, you're up in Morrison's, you're putting petrol in the car. Did you get a sense of the enormity right away?
I think so. Just going back to that night, it's definitely the highlight of my career by a million miles. The enormity of beating Rangers in a semi-final, and we were 2-0 down. I think that's what made it even better. We were 2-0 down, and I think if you asked anyone, we thought, well, that's the game done. Just see it out. But again, going back to team spirits, we had a really good team spirit that year. And once we got the first goal against them, I scored a header. You sort of just knew everything that Rangers had been going through in that, and you just got a wee sense of belief. And again, their fans getting on their back, and it just played into your hands, and before you know it, you're 2-2, and it was all Alloa. And again, to get the winner there was absolutely fantastic. And what you remember the most is just celebrating after you score. And I remember looking up, seeing my mum, my dad, my granddad. But that night, a few of my pals had came, and just as I'm celebrating in the corner, there's a photo, and they're all in the photo with me celebrating in front of them. So just moments like that, I think that defines your career, and something that, because as I said previously, you could play for 15 years and you only get a couple of these moments at our level. So you do have to cherish them.
I looked through the team lineup. 3 other guys that went on to play for Rovers. Obviously, Benny continues to be our captain just now. Tell us a wee bit about Liam Buchanan, but I'm also going to ask you a wee bit about Ryan McCord, because he was a player that it probably never quite came off for him at Starks Park, and I don't think we've seen the best of Ryan McCord, but he was certainly a signing that we were rubbing our hands about, because we'd seen him, perform just with such kind of confidence, really. One of these players that just sees things that other people don't. What was it like to play with? Go tell us a wee bit about Ryan, and tell us a wee bit about Liam Buchanan.
Well, Ryan, when I first went into Alloa when he was there, straight away his technique and his genuine just ability, first and foremost, was streets ahead of anyone there. And probably just what lets him down is his fitness, and he'll be the first one to admit that. He's not one that's ever really got super fit. So I think Alloa suited him at that point. They played on AstroTurf, they played a passing game, and there wasn't a big a big sort of concentration on being super fit. Whereas when you go up to a full-time club, you can't get away with training every day and not being super fit. So some folk are just comfy at certain levels, and Ryan, absolutely fantastic. Like the ability and left foot, right foot, technique, tricks. It's like a proper, like, not many players like him kick about the part-time leagues.
Yeah.
And obviously moving on.
What about Liam?
Me and Liam's got a sort of good relationship. As you said, we're both strikers that have played at that sort of League One Championship levels for the last however many years, and he's quite a character, Liam. and I always wind him up. So he sort of, deep down, I know he loves me, but if you asked him, he'd say he hates me. So, as you said, we've crossed paths quite a few times and been strike partners, and sometimes it's worked out for us, sometimes we sort of cut each other's throats because we're similar, both trying to get on the end of balls. Where, like, I don't think he's ever passed me once in his life, and he'll be first to admit that that's true. But nah, Liam's a good boy, and to still be playing in the Championship at what's he now, 38, 36, he's late 30s, ain't he? So it's a credit to how fit he's kept himself and his dedication and obviously his ability.
You guys that score goals, you carry a very particular pressure, and that I think the hero or the villain mask kind of gets thrown at strikers more than any other player, because if you're scoring the goals, you know, everybody's patting you in the back. But if you're going through a dry spell when your confidence is dipped, then people are either trying to pick you up or can be quite slating. What's that like for a striker, and what's it like being in and around, as you say, League One, Championship level? It is a level where, you know, it's one of the things that, you know, I would never wish that Rovers wouldn't go on and become a Premier League team and aspire for more. But the fact that we do play at this level means that you do have a connection with players. You know, the players are in and around the shops that you go to, and you bump into people and build relationships. What kind of stands out in terms of your interactions with fans, particularly across Alloa and Raythrovers?
As I said before this, at these clubs you get to know the fans, because they've got their core die-hard fans that live and breathe it and make you feel welcome. And we're human beings as football players at the end of the day, so all you really want is just support and folk to get behind you. And touching on obviously confidence with strikers and that, when you feel that the fans are behind you and your teammates are behind you, you feel like you can score every week. And it's maybe when you do go somewhere and you've maybe not earned the right for the fans to get behind you yet, that's when you have that wee sort of anxiousness where you're not scoring goals, and that's when it can start to build. Because as a striker, it's all about confidence. The minute you're confident, you score goals from any angle, off any part of your body, and the minute you've just got that wee bit self-conscious about you, if that's when you start sclaffing shots, missing sitters. It's, you know, because I think a good example of that's Louis Vaughan. He's absolutely adored by Raythrovers fans, and I think that shows on the pitch, because everything, when he plays, everything he hits goes in the net. Obviously he's highly talented, but I think that's just a good example of when a fan base really gets behind players, that's when they can see the best out of players. Because you know yourself, there is fan bases out there, there's fans at all clubs that they just take a disliking to a player for whatever reason, get on their back, and obviously you do need to be stronger than letting opinions of fans get to you. But I think it just makes it a whole lot easier when folk get behind you and believe in you.
Is it something that you would advise young players that they actually should invest the time in connecting with fans rather than kind of being a bit aloof? One of the things that certainly we've commented on many a journey to games, obviously not this season, but is how valuable interviews like this can be for players, because it actually lets fans see, maybe especially younger fans, that actually players are people, and actually you are approachable, and actually you're there to be having a chat with and so forth. Do you think that relationship, building that relationship, is something that younger players could maybe be coached towards achieving?
1,000%. I think in this day and age with social media and everything that you're able to do, building relationships around clubs, because if you're going to go to a club and you're really going to buy into it, getting a rapport with the fans, I think, is vital. But then on the flip side, as I've just said, fans can be quite fickle at times. So as much as you want to build a rapport, some of the things that you hear or get said about you, and sometimes comments can appear online, and you're like, well, it does knock you a wee bit, because I'm sure when I was younger, I just say it was Twitter or Facebook, I'd click on, just say it's Raythrovers, and it was, oh, they've been beat 2-1 today. You click on it and it's Spence was rubbish, yeah. Spence was this, and you're then saying to yourself,
Greg, I'm sorry about that. I apologised at the time.
But as you said, you do grow thick skin to it. Like now, I've no interest in reading anything about myself. I'm older, I'm wiser. But I think it's a bit of both. I think fans need to realise we are human beings. The more you support somebody and believe in them, the better they'll play. if you get on their back, which again you pay your money, and if you don't think they're trying, you're more than entitled to let them know what you think. But I just think for both sides, it's important that there is a sort of relationship there.
Great. In terms of your relationship with football, who were your footballing heroes? Who did you look up to?
Growing up, I watched Liverpool quite a lot. They were like their UEFA Cup run, I think it was 2002, and that was on the TV. You didn't have Sky and that back then. I'm acting like I'm born in the 60s, but
was it black and white, Greg?
Aye, it was close to it. It was Channel 4, but it was like Michael Owen at Liverpool. So growing up, I really liked Michael Owen, and I supported Rangers when I was growing up. So watching obviously their great teams, late 90s, early 2000s, and that, all with them, it's I'd say that you could name any Rangers player for back then, and that's sort of what I looked up to. It was Ali McCoist in his later days, then later on it was Dado Purcell and Nacho Novo, boys like this that were obviously doing well.
Who's the best player you played with and the best player you played against?
See, that's a tough question, because obviously at youth team I played with boys like James Forrest, Callum McGregor, fantastic players, but that was only a couple of years at youth team, whereas I think I see myself as my career as being lower leagues of Scottish football, because I played reserves with Sean Maloney, Anthony Stokes, boys like this, but I wouldn't want to say any of them because I don't think I had the real right to be playing with them.
So tell us about, in terms of League One Championship, who are the guys best you played with, best you played against?
Well, the best I played with is a boy, Ian Flanagan, that was at Alloa, which obviously links into this episode. He was absolutely fantastic and so underrated in the game, because he just goes about his business quietly, but technically the class he had, you ask any Alloa fan about him, he was a cut above anything I've ever played with. So I'd definitely say Flanny, and it's quite sad that he retired this season because he was far too good, and I'm quite shocked that he didn't play higher, if I'm being honest. Maybe injuries stopped that, and I've been to other clubs and folk are like, oh, who was good at Alloa? And I'm like, Ian Flanagan. And they're like, oh, I've never really heard of him. And you're like, you kidding me on? I was like, for the last 5 years, he's absolutely ran the show for Alloa. But as I say, he goes about his business quietly. So
he's one of those players that Neil Russell and I doing the away match commentaries in particular. We've got a wee chat board that runs alongside it, and he's one of those players that people who've listened to RaithTV for a lot of years will kind of have a wee bit of joke with us at certain grounds because they know we're going to praise certain players. So we'll get to Alloa, we'll set up, we'll look at the chat board, and there'll already be somebody saying, I bet that they'll mention Flanagan in 3 minutes. For other teams, because you do, you get to know the game a wee bit, and there are particular players that you think, well, they could do a real turn for us. At the moment, it's Kevin Crawley at Alloa. They're like, how long till they go on about him? That boat has sailed, lads. But yeah, absolutely knowledge, really good player. What about playing against?
Playing against a hard one, but I've actually got a really good story that links all this in. So when I was 16 at Alloa, and I was getting off the bench 5 minutes at the end and that, right at the very start, we came through to Raythrovers, and that was when Raythrovers won the league that season. And I remember, as I said, I was getting a couple of minutes at the end, just a young boy. Stephen Simmons put a bad tackle in on Dougie Wilson, so he had to come off just before half time. So I'm not expecting it. The man, Alan Maitland, turns round and puts me on. And at this point, I was 16-year-old. I was built like honestly, beside a fiver. I had long blonde hair. So he's threw me on. And I just remember I was up against Marvin Andrews. And I'm sure the other centre-back was Mark Campbell.
That's right, yeah. So
you can imagine a skinny wee 16-year-old boy that's never kicked a ball in his life at that level coming on against they two. And I just remember Marvin Andrews was heading the ball further and I could kick it at that point. Yeah. And that was like an experience. So I'd always say Marvin Andrews for that, because still then he could still play, he still had a bit of pace. And it was just a man via boy then. I couldn't even get a kick of the ball, if I'm honest.
And probably laughing his head off as he headed it as well.
Well, that's the thing. I'm sure in the last minute that day it was that easy for him. He got the ball and ran away down the right wing and crossed one in for the third goal. And you're like...
Yeah. You mentioned another name there that I would be remiss if I didn't pick it up. Stephen Simmons, another player that played across both teams. Well, did you play alongside Stephen Simmons at Alloa?
Yeah, so I played with Simmy at Alloa when I signed under Barry Smith, and he was one of the players I played against a few times, and he's a scary, scary guy. Like, just obviously he's a hardy player, tough in the tackle, and I thought he was a bit like Jim Goodwin, a bit of a thug on the pitch. So I've signed with Alloa, and straight away I was like, wait a second, this boy, like, he could play.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? And he was getting off his goalie on his 18-yard box and spraying the passing. I was like, what a player he is. And I remember early on, I gave the ball away, and this was like my second session, and he's absolutely rollicked me. I was like, oh my God, like, honestly, so scared of him. And he was one of the players that you really had to win his respect. You had to earn his respect. And I remember maybe a couple of months into that season, I finally got from giving the ball away and him being on you to he started to respect you, and you'd earned his trust. And again, I think that's right out of the game nowadays. Players like him, where when he's been hard on you, he's been hard on you for a reason, because he wants better out of you. He demands high standards, and that's what makes you a better player. So you're actually in training trying to impress him, and it just makes you an all-round better player. So I was really shocked at how, well, not shocked, but I didn't think he was going to be that good a football player.
Yeah, absolutely. An absolute cornerstone of the Rovers league winning team of 08-09. And again, one of these characters that maybe the first time you go to interview him or to meet him, or indeed, a family sponsored his jersey that year, you kind of take a wee step thinking, what's this conversation going to be like? And like most football players, if not all, just a really good guy as well.
No, totally is a great guy, and I still stay in touch with Simmy. Still have a good laugh with him now and again. So yeah.
So I'm going to quickly ask you about two stories that kind of, I always kind of look at what are the first two stories that pop up when you put a player's name in, and there's two crackers. You've probably told this story more times than you'd want to remember, but in terms of playing against Celtic and Craig Gordon injuring you, but then kind of stepping forward and up to the plate, rather than get you to tell the same story again, I wanted to just ask a kind of side question in terms of professional respect. Do players generally kind of follow up after they injure someone, or there's a big event in a game? For anybody that's not aware of it, you had a clash with Craig Gordon, and then he stepped up to the plate in terms of, as I read it, buying you a wee bit of time off your work. Is that accurate?
Well, not really. There's a story to go with that. So a couple of weeks after that incident, I was sitting on a Sunday with a few of my mates in my house, and the phone goes, and it was some reporter for The Sun. But I thought it was a wind-up, because in football you get all the time folk getting your number and a wee wind-up trying to get you to say something. So I put it on loudspeaker with all my mates, and they're like, make something up. So I was like, all right. So long story short, I basically said, I forgive him. He paid 3 months' wages or something, or 3 weeks' wages. Not thinking anything of it. Then obviously fast forward to the next morning, it's all over Twitter, it's all in the newspapers. It became
an urban myth now.
Aye, and you're like, no, and it was like, and I was like dreading it, because I was like, he's going to read the paper and be like, what is he even saying? But it was just purely because I thought it was a wind-up to start with. Then I had my mates with me, and they were like just make something up here, and just off the top of my head.
Have you spoke to Craig since then?
No, I've never spoke to him. He didn't get in touch after that game or anything.
Never asked for your bank details?
No, unfortunately not. But aye, so that's basically, and that's the first time I've said that was made up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because I just sort of wanted that to slip away. Because I was a wee bit embarrassed.
As I say, it's one of those things that just you type in your name and up it comes, and I'm sure there's a kind of rush of blood to your head. But as you say, I mean, football's football, and people are good people. So I'm sure that Craig Gordon more than most can take a joke.
Nah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
As I said, it was a few years ago now, so it's.
If he's in a good mood, if Hearts pick up the trophy, which we would expect at the last game at Starks Park, I'll maybe get him to one side and try and buy you some good faith. The other story was probably more bizarre, and that was the couple who said on Soccer Saturday that they were going to name their wee girl after the first player to score that particular Saturday. I think it was somebody where a name that would have sounded okay as a girl's name that they thought had scored, but when they checked back the records, it was Greig Spence. I'm assuming that couple never came back with a picture of their wee girl, Greg?
No, I've not heard anything back from that since that day. I'm sure that was my second game for Stenhousemuir, but it was my first goal for about a year. I'd went a year without scoring, and I remember went up to Elgin, scored after a minute. Then after the game, it was all about this baby getting born and getting called Greig. I was like, what's going on here? But I've not heard anything following up from that.
What's football in life and life in general got in store for Greig Spence? You've had this relationship primarily as a part-time player. We're in the middle, or well, hopefully we're coming out to some degree of the pandemic. Football's, a firm pause button's been pressed for you. How are you keeping yourself fit? You still as motivated to get back? Is there any indication when you might be back?
Well, to be fair, I just set up I just started my own business about 5 months ago now. I was working with my dad, just the two of us, for his business as a plumbing and heating engineer. But just the way the virus has hit and how it's affected certain things, I sort of had to go on my own. So since October, it's been quite good. So it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of focus. So that's what the future holds for me work-wise. And now is just really concentrate on that and just really try and build up a sort of small business to keep me going. And football-wise, obviously I'm at Stenhouse now. I was really enjoying it. And as you say, I'm just desperate to get back and get the season finished. But there's sort of no end in sight. But it's funny that you ask about motivation and whatnot. After leaving Raythrovers, after we didn't win the league that year, I would say, then obviously leaving the club, I would say I lost not the hunger, but the sort of desire to really, for a good year. I went back to Alloa that summer, and my whole motivation as a footballer when I was younger was I wanted to be full time. I wanted to make a career for myself. And when I left Raith the first time, it was my decision. There was a deal there for me, and I walked away from full time football because I felt I really need to go away and make like a name for myself, not on reputation, not as a young boy that's here and there. I was like, I really need to make like an identity for myself. So the next 3 years I spent really working my backside off to try and get back full time, and it just worked out well. I had a really good season at Alloa. Raith came back in, and that was a real high point to go back full time, and it was all going well. I was having such a good season to January. I'm sure I was on like 11, 12 goals. We were sitting top of the league. Then things happen in football, and I ended up back out the team. We don't win the league, and you're then out the door. So it took me a good year to really get over that. And as I said, I went back to Alloa, and if I'm being honest, my head wasn't in it. And Alloa, as I've said before, with the players and how you're treated there, it's nothing but love. And even that couldn't ignite a spark in me. And I did find it really tough. Then I went up to Arbroath. Dick Campbell was on the phone, desperate to get me. They were flying at the top of the league, and I thought, well, what an opportunity that is. And I'm being honest, my full year up there, as much as it was probably my funniest year, my head just wasn't in it. It just completely wasn't in it. And I think that my performances probably backed that up. And it wasn't until I went to Stenhousemuir I've started enjoying my football again, and I really feel the sparks back. I think lockdown helped with that. I think just a sort of total break from football for last year, going back in the summer, and now I'm more seen as like a senior pro they set really high, like good examples to the younger boys there. And I would say I'm thriving in that sort of environment. So I'm sort of glad the spark's back. And I think that coincides with work. Having obviously a business to focus on, and football, it's like a right drive on again, whereas I probably didn't have that for a couple of years.
So you've kind of hit that balance again, because I mean, we always say that we're kind of fully admiration for part-time players, because you are kind of living this double life of you've got your bread and butter providing for your family, but then you get in from work, and we all come in for work at times, and all you want to do is sit down. Well, you ain't got that chance when you're you play for a lot of clubs that have been relatively local to where your family bide, but we know players that are finishing in the West and driving through to Kirkcaldy for 2 hours for training twice a week to then play on a Saturday. It's an enormous amount of your life that you dedicate to the game. Do you still love football as much as you did when you were kind of 14-year-old boy?
Oh, absolutely. That's what folks say about me. I coach an under-20s team through in Inverkeven as well, so my schedule when everything's normal is 2 nights a week part-time training, two nights a week coaching, and on a Friday night my 20s play, and on a Saturday I play my own football. Then a Sunday I sort of get to myself. So my full week is just football, and like I'm enthusiastic about it. And I really love doing the coaching. And I still stay in touch with Paul Smith and John McGlynn. We always talk about players. If I see young players about that could maybe go into Raythrovers, I recommend them. And if they've got players that are maybe not quite cutting it, they speak to me. So it's good just being in that football environment, talking football. Like, I do really love it. And as I say, it's staying in now. I've sort of took on a role with quite an experienced pro because there's not many of us, and we've got a lot of young hungry players there. So it's now set the example for the younger ones that boys had to do for me when I was 20, 21. And I'm really enjoying that sort of side of things.
Brilliant. We're just kind of seeing the clock ticking down in the corner, so I'm going to round things up. We're just thanking you for your time. You've been more than generous. I always enjoy when we get a wee bit of time to chat, which it's been a wee while since you've left the Rovers there, so I can only wish you well on behalf of Raythrovers fans, but also on this occasion on behalf of Alloa fans as well. We'll keep our eye out for your name in the score sheet. We'll put any business your way. If we know him do any heating and plumbing requirements, we'll have to get your business card and get that up on RaithTV at some point. But Greg, all the best, mate. And I can only thank you for your time, but also your contribution and your goals for Raythrovers. Been a pleasure to watch you play, mate.
No, thank you. Honestly, it's a pleasure being on and catching up and talking football with you.
Brilliant.